Welcome to the third and final episode of our three-part series on communicating climate change. 3 live sessions aimed at getting to the heart of how the way we talk about climate has shifted and how stakeholders across the media, business, and nonprofit world are adapting to meet communities where they are. In this special third episode, we hear from Climate Group's Adam Lake, speaking to Wawa Gathru, founder and executive director of Black Girl Environmentalist, live from the Green Media Summit in March 2025. Adam, what can we expect from your conversation with Wawa?
First thing I would say is originally Wawa was going to be on the LinkedIn episode, which was the last episode that we just did, but due to technical difficulties, wasn't able to join us. However, we had recorded a conversation just a few weeks prior at the Green Media Summit, which covered so much of what we're going to be talking about in that session. So that's why we decided to take that and bring that into this third episode. And I think this discussion goes to a part of the conversation that was really missing in the other sessions which we had. I think what she does, including through her work at Black Girl Environmentalist, is applying these communications principles and framing into bringing in a whole new audience. But it's not just treating them as an audience who need to listen and consume. It's about using that audience as an opportunity to engage in the work that we do. So a lot of her work, as you'll hear from this conversation, is how do we bring in broader audiences to work in the climate sector, which can be something really, really difficult, especially in terms of some of the communities which Wawa works with. It was a fascinating conversation, and I'm really delighted that we're able to include this as part of this triple episode bumper edition.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to listen, so let's get to it.
Our next conversation is another really timely one. It comes at a time when even the word DE&I is under attack politically, and efforts facing increasing political scrutiny, and especially within the climate movement. I think is more critical than ever. So leading this discussion, we actually have Adam Lake, who's an expert in climate communications, who's helped shape global conversations through his leadership at the Climate Group and Climate Week at New York. That's here, that we've spoken at before as well. And joining him is Wawa Gathru, who's an influential, a number of things. She's an influential Gen Z activist. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She's the founder of Black Girl Entertainment. She's going to share some more information on that, but she's really trying to build pathways for Black women and underrepresented individuals in the climate sector specifically. So kind of all these things coming together. Together they're going to explore how we can change the narrative and ensure that climate movement truly represents all of us. So please welcome to the stage Adam Lake and Wawa Gathru.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I thought that last session was incredibly interesting, and we're going to be talking a bit about branding in a different sense here, right now. Let's just jump straight into an introduction. Wawa, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you got here?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Wawa Gathru. I'm so excited that I get to chat with you. I've looked up to you and admired the work that you're doing for the past couple years. So this is very surreal. So as was introduced before, I'm a Gen Z climate advocate. I've been in the climate movement for the past 12 years of my life. And I'm really passionate about making sure that our movement ecosystem, our workforce, is truly made in the image of all of us, and that all people can see themselves as part of the climate solution. I grew up in Connecticut. I started out as a youth climate activist, bringing my friends to the state capitol and busing in over hundreds of students to really talk to legislators about the importance of integrating climate literacy within the K-12 system. In Connecticut, became one of the first states in the nation to require climate into the K-12 system, which is really cool. I ended up doing a lot of different work and found myself at Oxford, where I was doing research on the experiences of women of color in the climate space, which really grounded my work in my nonprofit, Black Girl Environmentalist, which is a national organization really addressing the retention and recruitment problem in the climate ecosystem for emerging climate leaders of color. Outside of that, I wear a lot of different hats. One of the ones that I'm most proud of is over the past couple years, I've been able to be a member of the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council, which was the first ever federal advisory council solely for youth in U.S. history. Funny enough, it actually is still it's still around, though no one's answering our emails. And I also sit on boards of some of the largest, most influential environmental organizations in the country, like Earth Justice and Greenpeace USA.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've only got 20 minutes to talk this afternoon, and we've got so much to talk about. So I want to jump straight into the meat of the conversation here. And I want to talk about DEI. And I feel, as someone who has spent several years running Climate Week NYC, I worry about, are we not allowed to say the C word, climate, anymore? And DEI, I think, is being more severely targeted in many, many ways. So let's just intro with that. What are you seeing on the ground?
I think it's really important for us to really ground the conversation and any conversation about DE&I within history. I'm a history buff, so I'll give you a little rundown. So if you go back a couple hundreds of years, not even that far back, to Reconstruction era, that was one of the first times that we saw an anti-DE&I rhetoric really come front and center. That was a time after the Civil War where you had Black families who are now free, who weren't able to access housing or employment. So Congress did what? They passed the 14th Amendment, which was supposed to provide Black Americans with a path to citizenship, or specifically Black men, as well as equal protections under the law. Did that happen? Not necessarily, but Reconstruction era saw a lot of wins for the Black community and other communities of color. Then we go a little bit further in history to where the Civil Rights Movement, right? 1950s, you still have Black families and other families of color who still aren't getting equal access to housing opportunities and workplace opportunities. And so what happened? We saw the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which was really trying to hone in on workplace discrimination. And that was actually one of the first times that we saw a plethora of lawsuits actually persist, where you had folks, many Americans, who felt as though policies like this would actually provide Black people and other people of color preferential treatment in the workforce. Then we go to a little further out, Reagan administration, we saw the emergence of, terms like anti-white racism, reverse racism, things of that sort. That was the first time that we saw a presidential administration actually go after affirmative action. The Reagan Justice Department actually brought affirmative action to the Supreme Court, and funny enough, they rebuked that case. And now, where are we now? Actually 2020, racial awakening, we saw around $340 billion that were committed to racial justice by companies around the world between 2020 and 2022. And just 5 years later, we now have an overturning of affirmative action, and we have this anti-DE&I rhetoric that is taking front and center stage in our mainstream narrative, and we're seeing the very companies that committed that type of funding withdraw. So it's interesting, but it's important for us to understand that history is cyclical. These things happen, and even though we're here right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the future that we have to commit ourselves to. How that looks like in the environmental space, you know how it is. Right now, particularly for nonprofits, individuals who are activists, as well as folks who are employed in the federal government, it is pretty dismal. We all know, people who work in the climate space, at least 5 people who have had their positions terminated, whether it's at the EPA, whether it's at any agency, to be honest. We've seen organizations in the environmental space whose number one goal and number one thing that they do is to safeguard our planet for our communities, for our children, have federal grants that have already been awarded to them, have their funds terminated. So there's lots of really hard conversations being had by, again, the folks who've dedicated their lives to protecting our planet, and people who are questioning whether or not they're going to be able to continue to do their work in this space in the next 12 months. So it's dismal, there's lots of question marks, but I think we can also lean on history a bit to understand how people have previously dealt with these circumstances.
I think, let's be a bit frank about the sector that we work in, that we all work in here. I read an article which you wrote in Glamour magazine, which essentially was sort of calling out the elitism of the climate movement. And I have to say, coming from England, coming over here, been working in it for sort of a decade, hadn't gone to university, I really, really see it too. It does feel elitist. But when you look across the 1,000 plus events at Climate Week NYC and the activism on the streets, when you look at the wildfires in LA, which are affecting people who are not rich, when you look at environmental justice as an issue, which was about some of the poorest black communities having toxic loads like dumped on them because that's where you could get away with it. The issue of climate isn't elite, but it's coming across as that. Who should take responsibility for that, and how do we tackle that as an issue?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Sorry.
And I think this is a situation where it's like values versus narrative. When it comes down to the values of what environmentalism is all about, it's something that anybody across the aisle can get behind, right? We want to make sure that our communities are healthy and not just surviving, but thriving. But then it comes to narrative. The environmental narrative has, over time, the past several decades, as we talked about, over-relied itself on fearing people into action, doom, gloom, which is a losing strategy. And so I think this is where, we have a responsibility as folks in the climate space, folks who are in marketing, folks who know how to shape and package a narrative. We have a responsibility to tell the story of environmentalism and sustainability, not just from this optimistic and hope-ridden thing, even though there's tons that we can hope for, but from a truthful end as well. We don't have to rely on the apocalyptic, doom-ridden narratives. And if we lean into talking about the values that connect us, I think we have a stronger argument to make around building the strongest climate team possible.
So it's more fun if we don't agree on everything. So let's try and find something we might disagree on. There's something we picked up on just outside before this. I heard earlier today the call to make climate change sexy. And I think you agree with that sentiment. And certainly at Climate Week NYC for many years, I felt trying to make climate change cool was certainly number one of my jobs. I'm more of the mood, though, that actually what we really need to do is make it boring. Make it so boring you just assume it's the right thing and you look like an idiot if you're not doing it. But I want you to put forward the case for why should we be making climate change sexy?
I mean, here's the thing. A part of it is personal, which I didn't share with you. So I was a weird kid talking about the melting ice caps and polar bears, and everyone was like, okay, weird climate girl. And now people are talking about climate justice, and I'm like, okay, it's a win, but it's also not a win because I would have hoped that we're not in this circumstance. But here's the thing. Climate to us is sexy, and I think a lot of people in this room, sustainability, environmentalism, it's sexy because why wouldn't it be, right? It's sexy to want to protect our planet. It's sexy to want to be able to dream up a world better than the one that we have today. And I think that not making it sexy when we haven't yet gotten to a place where our policies are really reflecting the scale and urgency of the issue is not maybe the right move. I also think when it comes to culture, people always say that culture is always 10 years ahead of politics and policy. So if we harness the power of culture, marketing, media, entertainment, and really present climate as the backdrop that it is, and also climate possibilities and climate justice and hope, there is an opportunity for it to be sexy and then for it to become boring.
We talked earlier on about DEI or DE and I. There are so many acronyms in the NGO world, with NGO obviously being one of them. And I find myself sometimes defending an acronym as opposed to defending the values that's behind it. And it's really interesting at the moment when you look at the current political environment. There are things like clean air, clean rivers. These are Republican talking points that everyone in this room agrees with. And sometimes, net zero, we're so much, this is the right thing to do. We defend the branding we've created for themselves. We've just followed a session on branding. We have created brands around these issues and these values. And sometimes we can sleepwalk into protecting those brands we've built and not protecting the impact we want to have. What's your reflection on that? And how would you suggest people can make sure they're sticking to the issues and the actions at hand, and we don't accidentally sleepwalk into protecting these brands which are just there to serve a purpose?
I mean, the bottom line is that we want to push forward just climate solutions and have climate justice be at the forefront of our minds socially, politically, whatever arena that you're in. And I think that if we're going to get there, we have to understand that we have to shift our narratives. And I think a part of that is like letting go a little bit of the environmentalist ego, and really making sure that we're creating a space that other people see themselves in. It's really interesting because my academic advisor in grad school, her research was actually talking to farmers in the Mississippi Delta and seeing how different terms activated them. So for example, she would talk to a certain group of farmers about water quality and then another group of farmers about water pollution. She'd be talking about the same exact things, using the same exact messaging, but those were the two terms that she was differentiating. And what was so interesting is that you would have a group of folks that heard the term pollution, and now it's about government role, regulations, et cetera, now larger conversations than what was actually at hand versus quality. When she talked about quality, everybody was on board. Okay, yes, of course, we need the water, the quality to be at this rate so we can do this, X, Y, and Z. And so that's a really good example to where she shared that story to me and shared her research. And it was a big light bulb moment of actually, we just need to be very clear and not rely on the buzzwords because unfortunately, sustainability, climate, environmentalism, we are a space that is ridden with buzzwords because so much of the information in science is hard to understand. And we have to just figure out ways to break it down. And that's why climate communicators are so important because that should be their job and is their job.
I'm sure we're not the only two people in this room who have spent many weeks in conversations and in meetings talking about what to call things now. It's not green jobs, it's jobs, not the green economy, the economy. We're talking about energy independence. We're talking about community, perhaps, instead of environmental justice. So I think it would be great if we could join together in some way and make sure we create a sort of new dictionary for 2025. I think that would be quite, if Duolingo is in the room, maybe you could create a sort of language translator there. But on that point of looking at the difference between awareness and action, I'd love to explore that a bit more because, we both work in areas where, touch wood, getting awareness is sometimes quite easy, especially when you see at large moments like Climate Week NYC. Awareness in itself doesn't do much. So how have you, through your work, helped bridge the gap or rather utilize awareness raising to create actual tangible action on the ground?
Yeah, so I work in the green job space. So a lot of what I encounter is there's been a huge transition of young people and how they think about the future of work. Growing up, when I said that I wanted to work in the sustainability field, I had a lot of eyebrow raises. My peers who are maybe also interested in the same thing was, okay, so what does that look like? And even myself, all I could say was environmental lawyer, scientist, et cetera. Now, as climate change becomes even more ever present, whether we're talking about extreme heat here in the city, talking about Los Angeles and the fires, and just thinking about all these natural disasters that are increasing in their intensity and frequency, you have a cohort of young people who not only care about climate change, but want to be involved. The question for them is, how do we do this? And unfortunately, the green economy space, the workplace hasn't always been easy to get into. In fact, there's a term that we use in the space called the green ceiling, where it's just very hard for people to get jobs. And so for me, my job with Black Girl Environmentalist is trying to build pipelines. So we work with different organizations and companies, whether it's universities like Harvard Salata Institute or the Aspen Institute, and help really build pipelines for talent to get jobs, internships that turn into jobs. And so that's a tool to where we have a team of other Gen Z that know how to market these positions and say, hey, you may not have an environmental science degree, but you can also contribute as X, Z, or Y.
I guess as looking at how we in the room can help and support with that, I'm thinking, looking towards later in this year, is Climate Week NYC, there's COP, the Nest Summit in this space. What advice would you give to people who are that side of things of how they can be more welcoming to the people that you're working with so that they can have easier access to these spaces?
we exist in such a silo, right? Like, to be honest, I talk to the same people all the time, and then I have to really make an effort to go and not be in a climate space. And sometimes I think when we work in spaces that are around social impact or invested in sustainability and ESG, we think that everyone thinks the same way as us. And then we get out of that silo and we're like, oh, wait, actually, the rest of the world actually needs to catch up with us. And a lot of it is because we're not breaking it down for people. So I'm always an advocate for creating spaces for people to come together in person. The power of community building as a opportunity to introduce new ideas or even clarify things has been so powerful, which is why there's so much success with New York City Climate Week, because you have so many people in the climate ecosystem coming together, and then just passerbys who are like, or passerbys, people who are walking around saying, oh, people are having fun, they're coming together, and then they kind of get seduced into the idea. Again, climate being sexy through people being together.
We both work with a lot of brands, and I don't know about you, but one of the reflections I've had over the past few months is, and we're talking the biggest brands out there, they say, we are completely committed to all the climate stuff we've been talking about over the last few years. We're absolutely there. We want to be a part of this. But we just don't really want to get on a stage right now. It's a bit too risky. We don't want pay to play. We definitely can't sponsor. We don't have the budget this year. Maybe the department's been cut in half. But we're rooting for you. We want to be at the event. We want to network. We want to still do this work. And part of me gets that. If you're told by the boss that's what you've got to do to keep your job, you've got to go with it. Part of me also thinks, like, if enough people keep doing that, when you come back to us in 2 or 3 years' time, because as one of the presentations earlier on said, private partnerships of nonprofits is the best way of moving this work forward, we might not be here anymore. So what message would you say to those corporate organizations on how to get over that sort of shyness?
Yeah, I mean, again, I get it. Like, there's a lot of fear, like, even within the spaces that we work in. But if we're being completely honest, if we want to go to case studies, if we want to go to examples, there have not been companies, it's specifically nonprofits and federal workers who are really bearing the brunt of this issue. If you are not in those two categories, the attention is not on you, so you can keep going. Truly, the threat has not reached you, and it might not ever reach you because people, even the forces that be, may not necessarily see you as a threat in bringing these conversations around sustainability and climate to the mainstream. Use that to your advantage. That's your upper hand, and this is the time to double down. And I think something that's really interesting is that in our space, we have lots of conversations about the state of climate philanthropy. People don't know that climate is the least funded issue out there, which is absolutely wild. I hope that changes.
2%.
Yeah, 2%. And then if we go into women-led organizations led by people of color, youth-led, it's just dismal, right? But what we've seen even in our work is corporations and companies have been the ones to often step up to allow us to do some of the work that we have to do. And so there is this emergence of new age climate philanthropy, of companies and corporations really being the ones that can really bring our movement forward.
I completely agree with that. And I think it's really interesting to see some organizations be really brave at the moment, or some really unexpected places. I noticed a story a couple of weeks ago where JP Morgan have come forward and said, we're sticking to this because our chief risk officer says we need to do it for financial reasons. And so maybe we might be changing the narrative and the language, but actually finding a way through is what we need to get to. I want to ask one more question because our time is nearly coming to an end. It's counting up. It's come to an end, but I'm still going to ask it. We were chatting earlier on about, sometimes you feel like people only read bad news stories and not good news stories. But I was speaking to a very senior journalist last week, and I was asking, what's the difference in the hits you get on a good news story and a bad news story? And he said to me, the good news stories get more hits. My editor tells me to tell more good news stories. I just can't find that many good news stories. So I wonder, looking at the sectors that we work in, what's your experience in telling good news stories? What's the reaction you get when you talk about success? Should we be doing that more?
Yeah, good news stories is sexy. The elephant in the room, yes, is like anti-DNI. The other elephant in the room is that we're all not okay. Like every conversation I have with someone, we kind of just cut to
Look
the
how
chase.
much grayer I am than in that picture there.
No, I feel like those photos where you see presidents before and after their administrations, that's me in the past 6 months. But I mean, here's the thing. I think that this goes back also to your question about awareness and action. People like good news stories, but the good news stories that do really well is solution-based journalism. It's when you introduce this issue and you introduce solutions that are already happening around the world by everyday people that are not any more special than you and are doing the things and making sure that we are living in a better world. And I think when people have access to good news stories that present us with the reality that we also can contribute to, it's very empowering and allows us to see ourselves as part of the solutions and not just, read the story, feel good for a couple seconds, and then doom scroll.
Well, I've enjoyed having this therapy session with you in front of a few hundred people. I think that's a really great note to end on. So, Wawa, thank you so much.
So, Adam, we've heard the 3 different sessions here as part of our 3-part series. And there are a lot of similarities, a lot of differences too. But what are your key takeaways from all 3 of these?
I think one of the things that I sort of still have ringing around in my head, it was actually something that came out of the session in episode 2, when, to my own surprise, having worked in this sector as a sort of supposed communications leader for nearly 20 years, is we make so much of this stuff up. I mentioned that when I was chatting to Rebecca and Sergio. And I think in these changing times, it's very easy for us to make assumptions about how we talk to people, things we can do, things we can't do. And so what I love about all 3 of these episodes is we brought in people who are on the ground, who are coming at this from a point of data and fact and experience. And I know personally, there are things that came out through those conversations, and even the ones I've been involved with, I've listened back and I've learned even more, which absolutely we're going to apply to things like Climate Week NYC and the broader work that we do at Climate Group. And I really hope people, wherever they work, whether it's in climate or not in climate, they take some of these elements here as well, because it's so important at times like these that we base the decisions that we make on reality, and we don't whip ourselves up into some sort of hysteria sometimes, making us make poor decisions because we're scared, we're risk averse, or maybe we're overly enthusiastic. Rooting things in fact and rooting things in reality is so important, and the best way to do that is to speak and listen and hear from those who have experience on the front line. So I think that's the main thing I came away from on this, is a really great selection of people coming at communications in so many different angles, and I've really enjoyed being a part of this, and I've enjoyed listening to it as well.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, and the fact that we're able to get 3 different segments out of this really important topic. It's been great to see a lot of people come out, especially like on our LinkedIn Live. It's something that I feel like we don't talk about enough, and I'm glad that we were able to address it in these segments.
Yeah, and that's a good point, actually. The fact that we did this as a LinkedIn Live, as well as a live recording of the 50 Shades of Green podcast, it added a new dimension. And I do recommend to people who are listening to this, this is not just a shameless plug, I promise, but do follow Climate Group on LinkedIn and do look out for this event, because there are so many incredibly senior people who were following that episode, who are in the chat. This is as much about broadening our networks as well. And so I think the episode, watching it live as it's coming in and seeing people talking to each other, exchanging documents and papers and ideas, that's really part of the game as well. So that's a final recommendation. And of course, I do want to say, regarding that second episode that we did, we must say a massive thank you to the Impact Communications Institute for partnering with us as well. It was great to bring in that fresh new audience to join in this conversation, and we look forward to doing it again next year.
For sure. To everyone out there, stay tuned for, of course, more episodes of 50 Shades of Green, live, video, or otherwise. We'll be coming to you in all formats. So see you next time, and thanks for tuning in.